So again, it's about your vantage point on how things are done and how they are placed. So as I got prepared for coming to this institution of higher learning here in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, I wanted to do further examination upon the land in which I would come for the weekend. I've been here before, and I knew quite well the name Tuscaloosa should have a derivative, that is that of the indigenous peoples. However, just as with my people, I'm sure that someone has not anglicized it, they've looked at it, some other dynamic have changed it. So I decided to find out, what does the word Tuscaloosa mean? Does anybody here know? Thank you. The one with the trio, she knew that. Black warrior. And I said, okay, I get it. Black warrior, stay in your place. Warriors are in places to fight, to stand up and protect. And so those who protect the land, protect culture, protect communities, they are often called warriors. They are the ones that keep things in place so that there is a place for people to come to later on. And so it's not destroyed. And when I thought of black warrior, I said, you know, nobody's going to believe me when I tell them that a place in Alabama is named for black warriors. They're going to find that hard to believe. But they would have missed our story and its evolution over various eras of time. My home is St. Helena Island. I had to come through Helena to get here today. And so all along the route, I looked at where things were placed and the names that were there and why they were there and how one layer of his story, our story, was on the other. The indigenous people's names, the names brought in from Europe, the names that we give places and spaces today. And in the midst of them all, what do the people there have to say? So when I thought about it further, and I said, well, black warrior, stay in your place. I'm a person that loves languages, loves words, if you didn't tell that already. So I said, well, I'm going to a place where no doubt they speak American English. American English. It's a dialect of English. Okay? Like y'all like to call Gullah a dialect of English, it's not. It's its own language. But American English is a dialect of English. I know y'all don't believe it. But the Queen in London, darling, doesn't believe you speak English yet. So now, when I looked up in the American dictionary what these words meant, and I know y'all like, is she serious? Yes, I am. I looked up the word place because I needed to really get an understanding. It said place is any portion of space regarded as measured off or distinct from all other space, or appropriated to some definite object of use, position, ground, site, spot. But then at the end, the last definition said, rarely unbounded space. That stood out for me. Because where I live, you can tell where Gullah Geechees are versus anyone else who has moved in. Because Gullah Geechees live in what many call open space. We don't have gates up and fences. So you can go from one piece of land to the next piece of land, the next piece of land. And usually you're going from one family compound to another family compound to another family compound. So we don't believe in blocking off and gating off from one another. And we don't believe in just locking the spirit off in a particular place that way. We believe that we're stewards over the land. The land is our family. The waterway is our bloodline. You wouldn't want your blood cut off by a tourniquet very long, because then you die. You want it to flow. And so when you come into the Gullah Geechee Nation and you find bounds, it's usually someone else's construct that has been placed there as a layer over the way the indigenous people that were originally there, and then us coming and growing our culture out of the soil, thus being Gullah Geechee culture is indigenous to North America, because it's not the same thing that it was when all the African cultures were separate and the indigenous cultures that are part of us were separate on these other continents. So our spaces, we prefer to be unbounded in. So we don't go for the box and the category because it binds you.
Good morning. There were a couple of things I wanted to respond to in our litany of questions. One was how to displace peoples manage not to displace themselves. And that's a key dynamic. Dr. Marwan and I even were discussing this in some of the questions she asked me. And I know that one of the dynamics that we tend to deal with, and I found in other discourses with indigenous peoples, are the return of those who've been assimilated on the mainland, which is the dynamic that Mama Day plays out, which is the dynamic that, please, if you learn nothing else this weekend, know that Daughters of the Dust is fictional. It is not historical. And so there are a number of things that are, one might call it literary license taken within that production. So to kind of go into two questions at once, there are dynamics that come into displacement based on how people interpret. So if I now interpret the fictional as the world I truly wished I always had, then I want to now create what the fiction has presented. Yeah. We have thousands of people visit the Gullah Geechee Nation now because they've seen Daughters of the Dust, and then they're angry with us because we're not wearing long white gowns and sitting in trees. And nor do we cook our food on the beach. We barely take food to the beach, and if we do, it's already cooked. So because there is that fictional dynamic, in comes the visitor, or in comes the displaced Gullah Geechee in a city that says, wow, that's a beautiful film, it reminds me of home, I want to go back home. But now when you come back home, you end up bringing with you the urbanness, the westernness of the mainland, and now you don't even see that if you involve yourself in the political discussions of the area, you are not looking at the best interests of the collective body, but you are now looking at the best interests of the individual. Right. So if there's no Starbucks on St. Helena Island, for instance, but there always was a Starbucks on the corner when I lived in Manhattan, right? Now it's, well, why can't we zone it so that under that oak tree they could put a Starbucks? You see, so now you have issues of assimilation into what one might call the mainstream. And many times for us, those who have floated down the mainstream have washed away a lot of who they originally were. And so there needs to be a retransitioning back into community. So when we talk about movements, and I love that, the politics of the body politics is where are you moving and into what arena, and what do you gain by moving into it. That's right. You see, because some return home because they want self-aggrandizement, and they want a new political position. So they want to be liked by everyone instead of looking again at the collective good. Right. And so in the midst of that, when you get into the discussion of sanity versus insanity, I know for Gullah Geechees, and some have probably seen Lackawanna Blues. That's one of my favorite films because it reminds me greatly of Gullah Geechees who live in New York. Because when you leave the island, you always still know where everyone is. I graduated with 216 people, and I probably could sit here and rattle off at least half of that number where they are and whether they're married or whatever they're doing. And so for us, that's a family that develops. So when you move, you're always still connected to your family. So you never totally leave a place. So when you get to New York, they've always said to us, you may live there, but that's not home. Home is the island.